Now that we took care of our opacity mask, let's move on to the next semi-complex input is the tangent. The tangent input we will be using to control the flow map of the hair strands and give them a specular highlight of their own. And this is more specific to the Hairdini plugin that I made. If you do not have Hairdini or not using it, you would have to somehow make your own flow map for hair. We have the co-map data that I have baked into the hair cards from Houdini that is taken care of and baked into the UV4 and UV5 texture slots to store tangent information for each hair card using the Hairdini plugin that I made. And this is from the Substance Designer material. That is the flow map that I've shown you before. We will be mixing these into a final tangent map. So this way, when the specular highlights glean across the hair card, each strand of hair has its own unique specular highlight, like they're a 3D object separate from one another and not one flat card with one flat specular highlight stripe going across each hair evenly, which does not look natural and will easily give away your hair card illusion. And like I said before, I have baked into the UV4 and UV5 texture slots the tangent flow map data for each hair card in Houdini, as well as the Substance Designer material has its own flow map for each hair. So right here we have the hastily made hair cards. You can see we have flow map data for each hair card. So it's flowing down the y-axis. This is floating towards the x-axis, so it's more red. All right, so this is our graph, and how you make it is we just pretty much grab our co-map, it's pretty much just called co-map within Substance Designer. So once you bring in your Substance Designer, you just grab your co-map texture, and we have to build a float 3 vector out of this. You know, as it is, it's a float 4. All right, and because we are mixing this is a float 4 vector, but we're also pulling from the UV data from UV textures 4 and 5 from Houdini, and that is not a float 3. Unreal Engine reads UV textures as float 2s. So that sounds confusing to some of you maybe, but that's one of the reasons why I had to split up the co-map data from the Houdini hair cards, the actual geometry, into 2 UV texture slots, UV4 and UV5. Houdini can store float 3s into UV values, but I had to use 4 and 5 because Unreal Engine, when you read a UV value, it'll only do it as a float 2, so it's only reading 2 values. So I had to split up a float 3 vector for the tangent co-map data from the Houdini hair cards into 2 float 2s for Unreal Engine. But that is all taken care of within the Hairdini plugin, so you don't have to worry about it. But you just grab 2 texture coordinate nodes to build the Houdini co-map. You set one to 4, and you set the other one to 5. UV5 contains the Z data from the co-map data, so vector component 2. And this texture UV4 contains the R and G values from the co-map data, so vector components 0 and 1, since we start counting at 0, so 0 and 1 are here. Vector component 2 for the flow map is in UV5. And hopefully I did not lose half of you explaining that. So because of that, we have to do a bunch of append nodes to build this into a float 3 and go from a float 4 to a float 3 here, and this way we can add them up and Unreal Engine will not give us an error. So for the Houdini co-map data from the geometry of the hair cards, we grab our friend the component mask again, which I showed you before in the emission filter, component mask. And we just pretty much mask the first one as R, Control W, make the second one G, and we'll make this one an R2, R as well. And that is because even though this is the third component of the vector, it is stored in the first component of the UV5 slot in Houdini, because again, Unreal doesn't like vector 3s for UVs. Confusing, I know, but if you're using Hairdini, again, just get an R component mask, a G component mask, and another R component mask. This will grab our tangent flow map data, the X value. This will grab the G value. And this will grab the Z value, which should be the Z value, but it's the first value for UV5, not to beat a dead horse. So go R, G, R, and just append them together. And the append node will automatically put the B slot at the end. So this is always vector component 0. This will be vector component 1. Once you append that, it'll see what's already stored in A, and just add this at the end as a vector component 2. And again, I have to put the 1 minus node after the G component, but for some reason Unreal Engine is inverting the Y coordinate. For some reason, I have no clue why. If someone knows why, please explain it to me, because I am at a loss why this is starting at black up here and 1 at the bottom. It's UVs go from 0 to 1. Alright, so we put a 1 minus node to correct that, because that's how the flow map data should go. And you can see what looks like a flow map already in this plane. Start previewing node, and there we go. We got a good flow map. You should all recognize those colors as a flow map, and that is the geometry from the Houdini hair cards that we made. Start previewing node. Compare this to the Houdini one. So each hair card again is mapped in 0 to 1 space. So as the hair cards bend, this is what the data is baked into the actual geometry. Once again, I'll show you that in the UV slots. So this is what it looks like for the textures, but not for the flow map. The flow map again is stored in UV4, UV5. Since UV5 is just one float, you're not going to see it. So it's, yeah, see, it's only one dimensional as of now. So, but the information we need is there. Once we're done with the Houdini setup, we add it to our Substance Designer co-map, and we do the same thing with appending the nodes. This seems convoluted, I agree, but this is coming in as a float 4. We need to convert it to a float 3. So just do the same append trick, append, append, append. So now this is a float 3 RGB coming out. I set up a multiply node. This way we can increase the strength of the Substance Designer map as we see fit. So if we move the multiply up, it gets more powerful. As we move it down, it gets more subtle. And you can mix this in depending on if you want more of the hair card strands to be more prominent, or if you just want the flow of the card flow map taking over more so. So the higher this value is, the more the hair strands will kind of pop out more. The lower this value is, the more subtle it will be, and the actual geometry flow map will take over. You add these together, and we have to normalize it because everything is in 0 to 1 space for tangent normal maps. So we're adding in 0 to 1 space up here, 0 to 1 space up here. That'll likely give us a lot of values that are above 1. So we normalize it to keep everything relative, and we plug that into our tangent map. Hopefully I did not lose some of you on that. You'll see what this does is it just gives each single hair strand a unique identity and depth there, especially for specular highlights. I upped the glossiness value way up, so it's a very low roughness. So I wanted to exaggerate the specular highlights just to illustrate what these flow maps are doing. Right now I have the substance co-map turned off, so only the Hairdini flow map is plugged into the tangent. And you'll notice that our specular highlights are pretty much in a straight line. You can just draw a line right here. Just draw a line, draw a line. All right, and if we compare that to the substance flow map mixed in, these lines are more ziggy-zaggy. They're going up and down with each hair. You can see a little bit better right there. You can see a much more ziggy-zaggy direction. And again, this is over glossy just to illustrate what it's doing. And you can crank this value up right here and add it to the base Houdini flow map right here. And it'll normalize everything, so it'll get a prorated 0 to 1 space as you increase the strength of the substance flow map. All right, and right now I cranked up the Substance Designer flow map very, very high. So it looks kind of ridiculous, but just to illustrate, it is having an effect. You'll notice that the straight lines from the specular highlights are very much distorted now along each hair. It does look like each hair has its own highlight, and it's scattered all up and down on a per hair basis. You'll see a white stripe with a fainter diffuse colored stripe right above on the specular highlights. And this is pretty much the direct specular highlight, and the hair pretty much reflects the light beam, comes out more towards the roots as opposed to the tips, and gives off a lighter base specular highlight. So that's kind of how hair works. The white part is the incoming beam. More towards the root, you'll see the gold colored specular highlight. That is the light exiting the hair strand. And that is pretty much what the tangent input in the Unreal hair shader is doing. It's pretty much determining the direction that these highlights are supposed to go in. So let me just crank everything down. These are at normal roughness and tangent map levels now. So you can see faint specular highlights with a very faint gold highlight above. Once again, incoming beam, outcoming beam. If you want to download the material file or see pictures of the graphs online for reference to follow along, please visit my website at psynema.com. You will find a setup guide for the Unreal Engine hair shader with Hairdini, or you can visit and follow my ArtStation page at artstation.com/cinema. And that concludes part 4 of the Unreal Engine hair shader tutorial. Next, in part 5, we will cover world position offset, and that is more Hairdini specific. You can use world position offset for a lot of things, but we will primarily be focusing on the Pivot Painter features bundled into Hairdini, as it sets up Pivot Painter automatically for you. And we will go over setting up a world position offset graph with Pivot Painter features.